session today here in the auditorium of the 2016 EIC. I have the pleasure to introduce a keynote panel with a number of famous people. And I would like to call them on stage one by one. Please welcome Yves Mahler, Jerry Gable, Ian Glaser, Dan Bloom, and Martin Kuppinger. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining for this keynote. As you can see, in some countries of the world, 5 o'clock is tea time. Not here in Bavaria. It's more beer time.
Yeah, I mean, aren't you playing the blockchain drinking game? Right? Drink every time I say blockchain? You mean you're not?
That's twice, right there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, I would like just to introduce you very quickly with your current role, because probably not all people here in the room have followed your LinkedIn profile in the last month or so.
I'm Yves Mahler. I'm with ForgeRock, VP of Innovation and Emerging Technology, driving privacy and consent innovation.
I'm Jerry Gable with Axiomatics, a manager for the US team, and we focus on externalized authorization, dynamic authorization systems.
I'm Ian Glaser, Senior Director for Identity at Salesforce.
I'm Daniel Bloom, Senior Analyst with Kupinger Cole. I just signed up with Martin last week. Looking forward to being back in the analyst role, writing some interesting reports for everyone, and continuing to do my consulting work through Security Architects Partners, which I've been working on for the past year and a half.
Okay, I'm Martin Kuppinger. I'm one of the founders of Kupinger Cole, acting as a principal analyst.
Thank you so much. So next challenge for you guys is to answer the question that Martin, except Martin maybe, we'll see at the end what he's going to comment on it, has actually challenged or asked for in his presentation, his keynote earlier today, namely, what is the role of identity in the digital transformation? Yves, would you like to start?
Oh, well, I thought of a few roles. It can obviously be a tool for security protection, security and privacy protection. It can be the outcome of surveillance, including corporate surveillance for lots of kinds of intelligence, customer intelligence, fraud intelligence, and others. And it can form the foundation for a relationship, business to customer relationship, a business to end user relationship. So that's some thoughts there.
Okay.
Yeah, when I think of digital transformation, I think of taking a lot of the friction out of business processes, and certainly identity propagation across different channels of communication from an organization to their customers or partners is a very important aspect, and identity plays a key role there.
You know, I think from my perspective, the role is simple. It's crucial in the sense that every transaction is an identity transaction, right? Because every business process has to have the context of that identity brings to it in order to both integrate it and make it valuable.
I thought Mia, the speaker from World Bank, said it very well. Identity is all about access and the opportunity to have a prosperous life. Yeah. And so as enterprises, we can help our customers do that through managing their identity correctly. And as enterprises also, we can use that to enable our employees to be productive.
So I would just say it's the glue. It's the glue between the humans, the things, the devices, which makes all the transformation work.
So let's think about with IoT for a moment in that respect. Since you said that these three areas will converge over time, and there's one IT silo, or today's silo, probably not so long silo, I would say. By the way, folks, if you want to join into the discussion, use the usual tool, use the app, and we will make sure it is going to display up front, and we will see it here as well. So that we can respond to your questions. But coming back to IoT, if I remember the presentation earlier today from André, also questioning that we will drive ourselves no longer than 10 years maybe, our cars. So there will be devices that talk to devices, and people will no longer make any decisions. So there will be no people transaction. Or do I miss something in that picture?
Yeah, no, you totally missed something. It doesn't matter what the device is. It doesn't matter what the thing is, because behind everything, behind every connected device, there's a customer, there's a human in every situation. And that's the individual we're trying to serve. The thing, the connected device, is just yet another vehicle for a connection point along which we have to serve the customer and understand who that customer is.
Yeah. And I think, if you take the connected vehicle part, so the thing doesn't know where to drive. The human knows. The thing might know the better way to come from A to B, but the idea, so it might even know that that shop is better than that shop, but the point that someone wants to make some move in some way, this is always something which comes from the human. So this might help us to find better ways, that might help us to find better shops which have the better offers at that point of time, or which provide a better fee to the provider of the service, whatever else. But the human is in that equation anyway.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I can see that you want to as well, perhaps. I don't know, can you do that as a moderator? I guess you can, no. Maybe I'll do it for you. There's a lot of work that's been done on the concept of identity relationship management over the years, and there's a lot of identity relationships between people and things, between things and things, and a lot of times those relationships can reflect a lot of layers of intentionality. So, some of the work that, we've been doing in our labs includes what you can think of as authorization intention by a human to direct what things should do, and those layers start to look like the things are operating autonomously, even though they're not at some point, even if there's AI in them. Mm-hmm. But there's some abstractness to the authorization. So, let's say somebody marries into your family, and what you want to do is say, look, there's a new relationship, a marriage has happened, and therefore that new person in our family gets access to the smart blender and the smart refrigerator and the smart light switches. It's impractical to have them, have somebody set policies one by one by one by one by one by one by one. There's a lot of things you'd have to do. And so having those things act autonomously to accept that person into those things' lives, I'm now, anthropomorphizing a lot. It would be a lot of effort to have those relationships set up, one by one. But so identity relationship management, I think, can accommodate a world of a lot of things, even if there's very few humans. I think it should.
Okay. Anyone to comment?
Well, I've read some interesting things about identity relationship management, and I second Eve's notion that a lot of it needs to be put under the control of the individual that the things are serving, because only they can know how they want to manage them. But at the same time, you would have to work towards simplicity in the interface so that they can do that without too much cognitive overload. Another factor to consider is that Internet of Things is very different depending on what type of business you're in. If you're selling to businesses rather than individuals, the things that they have to deal with may be oil drilling rigs and trucks and pipelines and things like that. And those have specialized interfaces and sensors that have to be dealt with, and there may be some significant integration and scalability issues. So you may be working with, as identity vendors in the audience, you may be working with aggregator gateways that are actually handling those things sensibly for you. And when you look at the Internet of Everything, first billions, then maybe a trillion before too long, I think the things will start to acquire enough memory and processing power to handle the security, SSL, TLS, but I'm not sure that identity management as we've implemented it today can scale to talk to all those things. And so that will be one of the reasons why we depend on these gateways for a long time.
Yeah, Dan, to your first point there about discussing IoT in the context of some particular business, that makes a lot more sense than talking about it in the abstract. You know, there could be user-centered activities, you know, like a relationship management. But some of the interesting examples I've been reading about or talking about are, like in the healthcare world, if I have different kinds of medical devices implanted in me, you know, if I have a cardiac condition or diabetes condition, and it's sending data, you know, to some lab service or what have you, maybe I need access to this data so I can adjust some medicines, or they're monitoring me remotely or something like that. So there's connectivity of the devices themselves to, you know, receiving stations. I don't necessarily play a role in that, but I do need access to the data, or maybe I want to control access to the data. Another interesting one is for trucking companies that are shipping hazardous materials across the country, and there might be restrictions for, you know, GPS location restrictions. You know, I can't go through certain tunnels with certain kinds of materials. I may need to monitor the temperature of my cargo. You know, if it's above a certain temperature, then I can't go to other places. So there's a lot of interaction between these sensors and devices and management interfaces. It's not necessarily identity driven from a user perspective, not even, you know, except to notify the driver, you have to take this route, or you can't go through this tunnel or over this bridge.
But, you know, Jerry points out there's a distinction we don't often make, and we talk about identity and IoT, which is you have the data stream emitting from the thing. Okay, so that's one set of data with a set of identity and access controls, usually expressed at the back end, right? I'm monitoring it, and then it triggers some things happen. But then there's actually the device itself doing API interactions on my behalf. Those are actually two really different things. And the problem of combining those two is we find that the data stream coming off isn't necessarily something the device is acting on my behalf. It's simply just saying, I'm a device, and here's a bunch of stuff. And there we have authenticity. Is this the authentic device issuing the authentic data? But then you have the device actually calling APIs that update things for me as me. And that's a very different conversation where you do have identity management of the human or the organization or the relationship manager coming into play. Those two have to be actually treated separately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you know, I think that the underlying point is, at the end, even if you look at a manufacturing environment where masses of devices, sensors, etc., are interacting in some way or another, where this human part, the relationship to humans, doesn't play a role at all, more or less, the problem still is who or which thing is allowed to do what. So we are always back to the fundamental question of an identity on the access part, be it executing or using an API, be it some other thing accessing data a sensor has collected. So at the end, it all sort of nails down to identity and access decisions at a far bigger scale, with complex relationships between things and things and things, but also between things and devices and humans, etc.
There are a number. Just for a minute, please. Then you can just join. Can we just see the questions, because there's a number of interesting questions related to the discussion, so that you see what the people actually are asking for. So the first is this a separate discipline of device and things management, which has little to do with IAM as we know it? This is one way of questioning this connectivity or this connection. The next is more concrete. Actually, it says, what is the identity? Is it a person, or is it a tag, or is it a profile? Again, I think we discuss this every year, but we need to adapt this definition also to our needs, to what we actually want to achieve. And,
so
any views on this? I think Dan was.
It actually sort of continues on from the discussion. I'm glad you raised authorization, because a big issue in the Internet of Everything is authorization. I was talking about an energy company previously. It was actually one that Jorg and Martin introduced me to a while back, and what they were concerned about was that they had a lot of intelligent things in their environment that needed to be managed. They also had a lot of cloud services and vendors that were, in some cases, servicing or operating those things. And what they wanted was an authorization service in the cloud that would just make the right thing always happen. And I told them, well, you need an architecture before you can even start to conceive of such a service. But it was a significant moment in understanding, what customers are really after. They're trying to manage very different physical environments. And to the question of whether this is still IAM, it is, but it's not IAM as we know it. It's an IAM that has grown much more complex.
Yeah. So the question, we could turn it around, is the IAM we know, the IAM we should have or should know. So if I go back some 10 years or so, I remember having conversations with organizations about IAM architectures that, you have to take into account not only your employees, but your business partners, your customers. And even if you don't implement it yet, the design, the architecture, the view you have needs to be bigger. So a lot of identity management we have, I think, is not the identity management we should look at. And so I would simply say, yes, this is still identity management because it's, as I said before, the same challenge, identity access, and it's finally ending up where it should be.
There's a lot of companies, I'm thinking of heavy manufacturing companies. Boeing is one that has done identity management of equipment parts for a long, long time, and they just see it as identity and maybe not so much access management, but identity management of the individual parts. I mean, parts that go into an airplane, they last for a really long time, for decades, and they have to track them. They have identities that are unique, and they've just seen it as identity management for a really long time. So I think there's an existence proof, at least one, that you can see them as the same. But I think there's some obvious differences as well. Some ones that are easy to think of: scale, the actual attributes that you would track, particularly for smart things, but also for dumb things, in the case of the equipment parts. The authentication mechanisms, obvious. User interface, user experience. The particular roots of trust that you would use. I'm working on a bunch of things right now where you're having to connect the sensor to device to service trust all the way out. That's a really big key. Privacy implications are different. Once you connect them to a human, you do have to worry about privacy implications, but if it's just a device, it's different. And the particular relationship bindings. So if you have a device actually impersonating a user, that's as bad as when you have an application impersonate a user, which is why OAuth codified the current practice that we saw to not have the password anti-pattern. So we have an OAuth device flow now that has a good way of binding devices to people to avoid that. So those are some ways I can think of that are obviously different.
So there's a related question which didn't make it to the top 5, but nevertheless I would like to read it. Isn't IoT more related to configuration management than to IAM? So let's continue. Let's forget our IAM hat for a moment and take a CIO picture. Where would I put the responsibility for gluing these together? If obviously I need to integrate these processes, whom would I give the responsibility? Is it configuration management or is it the IAM people?
Well, I think there's a temptation to overplay our hand as identity professionals in the sense that if we leave aside for a moment the compute power of a thing, we just simply say, it's a device calling APIs and emitting data. In some regards, it's no different than desktop management, right? Let's not lose our minds and forget computers are just things that act on my behalf and do a bunch of other stuff for me. A thing is no different in that regard. And so that there is a discipline of people managing the inventory, the life cycle of that inventory, the identifiers for that inventory, the asset management aspects of that, which I think increasingly include security configuration and those kinds of things. And then there is the people that manage the things that transit through those devices, the identities of the individuals, what they can do, their relationships to other things. And that's our world. But the other stuff, I think, is not a world we necessarily want to encroach on. Let's face it, most organizations kind of suck at mobile management. You're really going to suck at IoT. Why would you step up to that pay? What you want to focus on is the relationships of people to the things and API services more and more, and stick to that and get that right, and let operational management take care of the devices.
Well, maybe that's the sweet spot for us IT or identity professionals, but there's an underlying theme to some of these questions here. And to your question, Sasha, it's who manages the access between these devices and these services or these humans? Well, much of that is known only by the business people because they're the ones that know what kind of services they're offering, what kind of customers they're trying to reach, and so on. So we in IT have limited knowledge or visibility to that aspect of the question. So,
You mean
but I
the
think
policy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the business policy, right? Not,
Right.
Or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
privacy policy, not necessarily the IT configuration device management.
Which
part
should
of it.
never be their problem.
Yeah.
I think you need to unask the question. There's something we need to understand first before answering the question. I mean, if you're a smart garage door manufacturing company, well, you're not doing IAM. It's your product that you make money off of, right? Or if you've just bought a bunch of smart door locks for your business facility, well, then configuration management and credential management for the installer to come provision the certificates into the door locks is part of the configuration management of the IAM for the door locks you've just bought.
So maybe the point is, does the distinction between configuration management and IAM in that way really make sense in the future? Or when does it make sense for which organization, when not? So I think I think we can't answer the question from a perspective of saying we have that organizational structure, so we need to put it in some of the silos. The first question we should raise is, do we need, as part of this overall digital transformation, to use the bigger buzzword here, do we need to get rid of silos or to change the silos at least before we look at in which silo to put which responsibility?
That's an interesting question because I really liked Ian's answer. It was pretty much what I was going to say, that there was asset management and there was identity management, and both of them deal with smart devices and machines that are in the enterprise. So you could look at it as through the lens of your existing IT services and capabilities architecture. You have an identity group that manages the devices when it comes to naming and authorization and authentication, and you have an asset management group that manages vulnerabilities and configuration and inventory. But then there may be still other scenarios for IoT that don't fit well in your existing organization structure.
So let me give a very short example of what I mean. Why I think this is going to be an important question in the future. Or maybe we need to ask the question differently. I don't mandate that the way the question I was asking is the right way. I just spoke with a manufacturing company that produces pumps. And they've been now challenged by their competitors actually to equip electronic elements to that pump so they can do preemptive manufacturing and lots of added value stuff directly coming from them. But since it's so hard actually to allow these devices to communicate through the network of the customer, they install GSM modules to directly communicate from the machine to the manufacturer's home. So who is in control of that identity? That's the question behind.
Very
And-
much like a smart meter use case I've
Yeah, it's very
talked to people
similar.
about.
Well,
yep.
go back and look at the contract, right? I mean, like, this is not in the absence of a business relationship. So in some regards, the answer goes back to how did procurement arrange the relationship with the supplier? And sometimes you get really weird scenarios like ones where we've seen you don't actually own the vehicle or the piece of farm equipment. You actually are just a licensee of the use of it. And when they expire their certificate, your tractor doesn't go anymore. And that comes back to what did the contract look like? And then it becomes an identity or access or security management problem.
It's
Yeah.
pumps as a service.
Yeah, I think it also leads to an interesting point in that entire discussion, that if we look at bigger things or collections of things, then it becomes apparent that we need to understand that there's not a single view on that. So my favorite example is the connected vehicle. And in the connected vehicle, you have increasingly the event data recorder, and you have a lot of parties which are interested in having access to the data. So the manufacturers, because they kind of learn a lot about how the cars are used, insurance companies, police in the case of an accident, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what this shows is that we can't solve these challenges with a concept of there's one thing which is owned by one other entity who's the only one who has access. We need to have sort of privacy by design, security by design as a concept in that, in the sense of we are capable of flexibly by policies controlling under which circumstances does someone have or something have access to that data. So we need to become far more flexible and far better in that area to solve challenges such as the pump, which is still relatively easy compared to the connected
Yeah, this
vehicle.
is, I like an example because it makes things very simple.
Yeah.
You can immediately understand the complexity of the problem in a
Yeah.
larger scale. Right.
This is something where, you know, at a previous conference that I was at, can't remember which one because Q2 is full of them, but people were talking about microservices having some problems around kind of the legal level of how to sort this out. And this is what you're talking about. And there's three things that I don't think microservices have sorted out: identity, privacy, and security.
Three small things.
Small little things
But we
that haven't
just bolt that on later.
figured out. But you know what I think might solve it? Blockchain.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Eve.
Seriously, I mean, microservices are designed to be so permeable. And you know what they haven't solved for is, well, in the Kantara workshop this morning we were talking about the BLT sandwich, business, legal, technical. I mean, you know, technical you can figure out, but we kind of need the legal layer for microservices. And identities are almost as much about a legal layer because they're ourselves, and we need to figure that out cleanly.
But here's the thing. I think that's entirely true. But I think some of this is a symptom of we continue to design things thinking they are single use, single user.
Yes.
Right? And when we start talking about like smart cities, now you've got layers upon layers of relationships to a thing that I might legally own, that someone else may be in their physical possession, emitting data to an untold number of places or sharing another untold thing. Except we still design our systems for the most part thinking,
To be
I built this
siloed, yeah.
microservice just for me and it's super pretty and I'm the only one who can ever use it, which is total BS because once it's out there, everyone
ridiculous.
wants to use it.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, a smart thing has APIs almost by definition, although, you know, many of the consumer ones really don't, and they ought to. But once you start thinking microservices, which you should be, and even the consumer smart things should be, you really ought to be thinking multi-user life cycle. You know, there was a session at the Internet Identity Workshop a couple of weeks ago. I've just bought your smart home. Now what? You know, the life cycle of a home where somebody else new moves into it, everything has to transfer. And I think there's some good answers that can be had for that. It's not intractable at all. But we have to start thinking about that. And it's precisely an identity and a privacy and a security problem.
Okay.
Yeah, another question I like to pick here that I like. uh, again, a more practical one. What should be the token to identify a sensor or a machine? Can you maybe scroll down a little bit so that everybody can read it? It's pretty well a little at the bottom. I think we touched a number of the questions at the top, so therefore I get new ones. SAML requires SAML requires a way to rich request response protocol, and trust centers do not yet have a business model for millions of machines. Are a Bosch or a Whirlpool or a Bayer going to put down $100 to get a certificate for one device?
Well, there's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, what's the question there?
Yeah, like a soap stack on a device? That's going to
It's
work.
the all singing, all dancing question.
I guess I'm not quite understanding the question, because it seems that the device is just another subject that belongs to a domain that has a trust relationship with another domain, and the device can use SAML tokens in the usual way, just like a person.
It says it's true. It's actually
I see now.
probably in many cases.
It's
you
here
can
now.
go to also look to the front.
Yeah, I can't
Here
read it from
already.
here.
Oh, good. That was
Far away.
horrifying.
Okay. Yeah. So this is.
Oh.
But we have only 10 minutes left, so maybe I'll leave that question for.
Well, no. So let's break it apart. Let's leave the
see.
certificate question for a second, because it has to do with your deployment model and whether you want the certificate to be publicly validatable. Let's leave that aside. Token format.
Well, Internet of Things, IPv6, everything
No.
open.
Maybe not always. I mean, industrial deployments of that, it's not necessarily a publicly validatable certificate, and for good reason. But let's leave that aside for a second. Token format. What can developers work with? What can things support? You can't have token bloat, right? You can't put down a massive Kerberos ticket onto some device. That's just not going to happen. And what are developers working with? Well, to me, it's a JWT that you could sign. It's pretty simple. Don't overthink it.
Maybe it's none of the above. Maybe there's some new, better format that's more appropriate for this kind of massive scale.
If you can drive adoption and developer adoption with it, awesome, rock on. In the meantime,
maybe
Every
the job is the best.
manufacturer does what he wants. So.
Yeah.
And we not only have to deal with the 5 usual ones from the business IT world, right?
I think if the device could handle SSL TLS, it could handle SAML.
you want to put a soap stack on a device?
That-
I mean,
there-
the Nest is a beautiful thing.
Okay,
You're going to dump like WS Trust on this thing? God.
I love SAML, don't get me wrong.
I love
I mean,
JWT too, so I think
we
they're all
built
good.
SAML with the tools we had lying around the house at the time, and there's some friction associated with those tools that we no longer have, that we've managed to start eliminating, and we can eliminate friction, and that's good. I mean, there's still some sensors and devices that have constraints, and those constraints can go away over time, but still, you don't have to, build bloat in where you can avoid it. But there's technologies at the sensor level and also at the device level that are, that are working hard to build more trust in. Trusted execution environments. There's the EPID technology from Intel that has some privacy enhancing qualities at the manufacturer level. There's lots of ways they're trying to sort of build in that sensor to device to ultimately service qualities that we're going to need. Recent TEE breaches notwithstanding.
And the other thing is, I think Ian's answer has gone in that direction. Not everything will communicate through full stack of services. So we will see, particularly when we look at sensors, we will see a lot of situations where sensors are only accessible through a gateway, and then it's from that gateway you have to have a more complex security. And if you talk with the vendors in that space, they are looking at sort of layered approaches with more and less dumb devices, so to speak. And clearly a light bulb might have less technology in than a car will have in, etc. So, and then we'll find answers. And clearly it's also, at the end, economy of scales works in various ways. And clearly it's, if you're starting to order 100 million certificates, you probably will have a different deal with your PKI than you have today for a few thousand employee certificates.
Yeah. So, but ultimately, I mean, I would agree that every device is or should be under control of a person. At least that's my ethical belief that it should be the case. Maybe there are different business cases, but but that means ultimately that these devices should be connected some way or the other to people, right? And getting back to that old question, maybe this discussion gives that discussion a new flavor. Namely, if we go back to this customer IAM discussion we have year by year, whether it should be separate or together, does the IoT change of landscape impact this discussion? So, is it changing the answers? Whether customer IAM should be separate or
Well, I think it adds a different element to it. So if you think of an auto manufacturer, there's their customers, right? The car owners or the car leasers that are, you have some aspect of managing those identities. But then, of course, the cars themselves are emitting so much more data now, and that is available either to the dealer, the manufacturer, or the car owner. So I think over time, in certain industries or certain scenarios, it blends more and more. The IoT management, the consumer management, and your internal identity management.
I think that's the point, and I've wrote a blog post a while ago which has been heavily misunderstood because I said consumer identity management is not a separate discipline. There are new things in, but at the end, and with all the relationship, we have to have an integrated. So it has to fit together, it has to work together. Also, the new things you're doing have to work with sort of more traditional stuff, etc. I think this is a very essential element of that. So we can't just segregate it. And I always raise a simple question. Name the one application you have in your organization which is only accessed by customers but not by employees.
Your comment during the keynote also that IT was increasingly becoming part of the business rather than a silo is very germane to this point of customer identity management, because the customer identity management use cases excuse me, relate very much to the business model of the company and how they're selling their products and who they're selling their products to. So IT really needs to follow the use case of the business rather than some generic architecture pattern for how authentication should work in a authentication infrastructure. So it's really, and it's going to vary a lot depending on the type of company. For some companies, their customers may be fairly similar to their employee use cases, but for others, they could be very different. So you'll use different solutions, but you want to have some common services you can use across both and some common governance strategies.
Well, I mean, connected devices are just another channel across which you're going to connect to your customers. So think about how frustrating it is when you have one user experience as an individual calling a company on the phone versus getting a wholly different, I don't know who you are experience in person, like say an airline ticket counter. This is the same thing, right? So your connected devices should have give you the customer the same experience.
The way I think of it is the way you make choices when it is your customer versus an employee is, in fact, you're not the boss of them, and you
There's
can't
a different contractual relationship.
Yeah, you can't make them do things. And so, whereas in the era of when we talked about BYOD, for employees, you can make them stop using Android devices if you think they're unsafe. You can't make your customers stop using the cool new Android device. And the same is true of, like, let's say you're in a SCADA environment and you're worried about your employee bringing in an unsafe new smart microwave oven into their place of employment, which is a real concern, frankly, a consumer, smart device. But you can't make consumers buy the cool new smart microwave that turns out to blow up, or maybe the smart hoverboard, which do blow up. And the other consequence is when it comes to privacy, consumers have different incentives. And you do have different contractual obligations, as you're saying, for those two populations.
Thank you so much. Can you please scroll up the questions to the top again? Just scroll to the top. Can you make that? Yeah, perfect. There's one question, I think the third or fourth, for closing this excellent, I think, very, very good, very excellent panel. No, it's just up there. Go up again. Up. No, that way.
The other
right?
up.
Exactly.
The other up.
The other up.
Where is this? Speaking of identities, that's your final statement you can make. Can anyone identify Satoshi Nakamoto for all of us and let us know who is behind Bitcoin and blockchain, and so we may trust them? Any ideas closing this keynote? Very short statement.
Tooth Fairy.
No ideas.
What is?
I saw a article, I think it was dated May 3rd, that somebody had come out and claimed that he was
Yeah, the Australian
Satoshi.
guy.
Yeah, the Australian guy. And,
Yeah,
and
not
half,
so much.
half of the community believe him and half of them don't.
But given
So
the
now we're even more confused.
given the various concepts of blockchains, do we have to care about?
Drink
Maybe.
again?
Oh yeah, we do. That was
If we
good.
look at OpenSSL, but anyway. Okay, thank you very much again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sasha.
We can go this way.
So we